For most of her 63 years, Eleanor Hayes had learned to live. After decades of working, caring for others, and making compromises, Eleanor had convinced herself that peace was enough. Motherhood belonged to another life. There had been a time when she imagined a nursery and a child calling her name. But years passed, and the dream became something she rarely remembered. Then, one Tuesday morning, her body gave her a reason to wonder. The nausea had lasted 2 weeks. Eleanor blamed a stomach bug. Then came exhaustion and dizziness. At her age, pregnancy was not an explanation she considered. "It is surprising." The doctor opened the folder. "You're pregnant." For several seconds, Eleanor did not move. "Pregnant?" she whispered. Amelia nodded. Eleanor laughed in disbelief. Then tears filled her eyes. They were not tears of fear. They were tears that seemed to have been waiting for decades. At 63, Eleanor was going to become a mother. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel alive. She asked whether the pregnancy could continue. Amelia answered carefully. There were serious risks. Eleanor's age made the pregnancy extraordinarily high risk. "You need to understand," Amelia said gently. "This will require very close monitoring." Eleanor nodded. "I understand." She sounded determined. That evening, she carried the news home. Richard was sitting at the dining table when she entered. He looked up from his phone. "You're late." Eleanor smiled. "I have something to tell you." "What happened?" She sat across from him. "I'm pregnant." Richard stared at her. He did not smile. "What?" he finally said. "I'm pregnant." Richard pushed his chair back. "No." Eleanor blinked. "That's impossible." "It isn't." He rubbed his forehead. "Eleanor, you're 63. I know. This is dangerous. I know. You could die." Her happiness faltered, but did not disappear. "I'm going to see the doctor. We'll take precautions." Richard turned toward her. "And what did she say about termination?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "It doesn't matter." "It matters." "No," she said. For the first time in their marriage, Eleanor saw something unfamiliar in Richard's face. Not concern. Fear. She stood. "I'm keeping this baby." Richard stared at her, as though the decision belonged to both of them. "You need to think carefully." "I have." "You don't know what you're risking." "Yes, I do." She picked up the folder and walked upstairs. Later that night, Eleanor locked herself in the bathroom. She took the pregnancy test from her purse and held it beneath the light. 2 unmistakable lines. Her fingers trembled. She pressed the test against her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she imagined a future she had thought impossible. A tiny hand. A child's laughter. Someone calling her mother. She smiled through tears. Then she opened her eyes. Richard stood silently in the doorway. He said nothing. Neither did Eleanor. But as they stared at each other, she realized something had changed. The pregnancy had not given Eleanor a new future. It had exposed a fault line beneath the old one. And neither of them understood how deep that fracture would become. The silence in the bathroom stayed with Eleanor long after Richard disappeared from the doorway. She could still feel the weight of his stare. That night, while he slept downstairs, Eleanor opened a small leather journal she had not used in years. On the first page, she wrote the date and then stopped, her pen hovering above the paper. "I am 63 years old, and I am pregnant." She stared at the sentence. Then she smiled. The words looked impossible, almost absurd, yet they were real. Beneath them, Eleanor began writing about the fear, the excitement, and the strange warmth that had settled inside her since the doctor confirmed the pregnancy. She knew what people would say. Too old. Too dangerous. Too selfish. She had already heard those words in her own imagination. But she refused to let strangers decide whether this child deserved to exist. Over the following days, Eleanor quietly reorganized her life. She called the clinic, scheduled appointments, started taking vitamins, and began researching everything she could about pregnancies later in life. Richard noticed every change. "Another appointment?" he asked one morning. "Yes." "When?" "Thursday." "What time?" Eleanor looked up. "Why?" "I need to know." "You don't need to know every detail." Richard's expression tightened. "I'm your husband. And I'm the one carrying the baby." For a moment, neither spoke. Richard eventually looked away. At first, his questions sounded reasonable. He asked whether she was eating properly, whether she felt dizzy, whether she had taken her medication. But soon, the questions became something else. Who had she spoken to? Why had the doctor called? Why was she spending so much time reading about pregnancy? Why had she scheduled another appointment without telling him? Eleanor began noticing the pattern. Richard wasn't simply worried about her health. He wanted control. She started keeping her journal hidden beneath folded clothes in the bottom drawer of her bedroom dresser. On Thursday morning, she met Dr. Amelia Carter. Amelia was calm, direct, and careful with her words. She explained that Eleanor's pregnancy carried serious risks, including complications that could threaten both mother and child. "You need frequent monitoring," Amelia said. "We cannot treat this like an ordinary pregnancy." "I understand. Your age makes certain complications considerably more likely." Eleanor nodded. "I'm not pretending this is easy." Amelia studied her. "Are you frightened?" "Yes." "Are you considering ending the pregnancy?" Eleanor looked toward the window. "No." Amelia paused. "Does your husband support that decision?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Amelia noticed. "You don't have to protect anyone in this room." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "He's afraid." "That isn't what I asked." A long silence followed. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "He wants me to reconsider." Amelia nodded slowly. "Then I want you to know something. Whatever decision you make, it needs to be yours." Those words stayed with Eleanor after she left the clinic. That evening, she returned alone. She found Amelia's number in her phone and called before she could change her mind. "My husband says he loves me," Eleanor said quietly. "But lately, it feels like he loves the life he had before I became pregnant." There was silence on the other end. Then Amelia asked, "Why do you feel that way?" Eleanor looked toward the hallway. Because Richard was standing there again, watching. And this time, Eleanor understood that the pregnancy was changing more than her future. It was revealing the marriage she had spent years refusing to examine. For the first time, Eleanor wondered whether fear was quietly coming from home. The fear Eleanor had carried home from Dr. Carter's office did not disappear. It settled into the walls of the house, changing the way she looked at everything. For years, Eleanor had believed the quiet between herself and Richard was simply what happened after decades together. They knew each other's routines and rarely argued. But now, with a baby growing inside her, she noticed everything she had spent years ignoring. Richard called their life stable. Eleanor had always called it settled. There was a difference. She remembered the first years of their marriage, when they had been younger and convinced that happiness was something they could build through sacrifice. They had wanted children immediately. 11 years into their marriage, Eleanor became pregnant. The memory returned one night while she sat alone in the kitchen. There had been a nursery upstairs, a crib, tiny clothes, and a yellow blanket. Then, suddenly, there was no baby. The loss destroyed her. Richard responded differently. He returned to work, handled arrangements, and insisted they move forward. "We can't live in the past," He had told her. Eleanor remembered them. She had wanted to grieve. Richard had wanted normality. After that, Eleanor learned to bury things. She gave up opportunities when Richard needed stability. She stopped talking about another child when he said they should be grateful. Eventually, motherhood became a closed door she stopped trying to open. Until now. The pregnancy unlocked everything. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor was sitting in her car outside the clinic when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She almost ignored the call. "Hello?" There was silence. Then a man said, "Eleanor?" Her breath caught. She knew that voice. "Samuel?" The call ended. Eleanor stared at the screen. Samuel Reed belonged to a life she had not spoken about in decades. Before Richard, there had been Samuel. He had been her first serious love, the man who made her believe life could be spontaneous. They had talked about marriage, children, and a small house outside the city. Then Richard appeared. Eleanor never described it as betrayal. Life changed. Samuel left, Eleanor married Richard, and the years swallowed the distance between them. That was what she told herself. The phone rang again that evening. This time Samuel spoke. "I heard about the pregnancy." Eleanor froze. "Who told you?" "No one." "Then how did you know?" "I'll explain." She refused to meet him. She refused to tell Richard about the call. But secrets rarely remained where people placed them. 2 days later, Richard noticed Eleanor smiling at her phone. "Who is it?" "Nobody." He reached for it. Eleanor pulled it away. "Richard." Something changed in his expression. "Who is Samuel?" Her heart dropped. She had forgotten to delete his name. "He's someone I knew a long time ago." "Before me?" "Yes." "Why is he calling you now?" "I don't know." Richard stared at her. "Is he the father?" Eleanor recoiled. "No." The answer came. But Richard had already seen enough to become suspicious. That night, Richard found her phone charging beside the bed. He opened the messages. There was nothing explicit. No confession. No proof of an affair. Only sentences carrying the intimacy of unfinished history. "I never stopped wondering how you were. I wish we had gotten another chance. I'm glad you're happy." Richard photographed the screen. Then he stepped into the hallway and stared at the image. His face revealed nothing at all. He opened another message thread and sent the photograph to an unknown number. Beneath it, he typed one sentence. "I need to know who the father is." He pressed send. Then, from inside the bedroom, Eleanor moved in her sleep. Richard looked back at the closed door, and for the first time, the question was no longer whether their marriage could survive the pregnancy. It was what he was willing to do to control the truth. Richard's message to the unknown number should have been the end of his interference. Instead, it became the beginning of something more deliberate. Over the next week, Richard found new reasons to question Eleanor's pregnancy. He wanted another blood test, another ultrasound, another opinion from a specialist he had chosen himself. "We need certainty," he told her one morning. "Certainty about what?" "The baby?" Eleanor stared at him. "You mean the father?" Richard did not answer. "I already told you. Samuel isn't the father." "Then testing should prove it. I don't owe you an investigation. You owe me the truth. The truth is that I'm pregnant, and I'm keeping it." Richard's jaw tightened. Their conversations no longer felt like conversations. They felt like interrogations. At her next appointment, Dr. Amelia Carter noticed Eleanor was unusually quiet. After checking her blood pressure, Amelia frowned at the monitor. "It's higher than before." "I've been stressed." "I know." Amelia checked the reading again. "The fluctuations concern me. Your body is under enormous strain." Eleanor looked toward the ultrasound machine. "Is the baby okay?" For now. That answer frightened her. Amelia sat beside her. I need you to understand something. Continuing this pregnancy may become increasingly dangerous. Eleanor nodded. I know. I want you to consider every option. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I can't. You don't have to decide this second. I already decided. Amelia remained silent. Eleanor touched her stomach. If I end this pregnancy, I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. That doesn't mean you're choosing recklessly. I know the risks. That was the part nobody seemed to understand. Eleanor wasn't pretending she was young. She wasn't ignoring the statistics or imagining that love could protect her from every complication. She believed the child had become part of her before she could prepare for it. She could accept fear. She could not accept surrender. Richard used that certainty against her. At home, he began calling her selfish. You're thinking about yourself. No. I'm thinking about my child. You're risking your life. It's my life. And what about me? Eleanor looked at him. What about you? Richard's voice cracked. I could lose you. For a moment, she almost softened. Then she remembered his questions, the hidden messages, and his obsession with the baby's father. You're afraid of losing control, she said. He slammed his hand against the table. Don't tell me what I feel. Their arguments became louder. Doors were shut. Meals were abandoned. Nights passed without conversation. One evening, Richard stood between Eleanor and the front door. You're going to see another specialist. No. You don't get to make this decision alone. I've made it. You're being selfish. Eleanor's hands trembled. You don't want me to survive this. You want me to become the woman you remember. Richard went completely still. That isn't true. Then why does every conversation end with you trying to change my mind? Because I love you. Eleanor looked at him for several seconds. I don't know what your love looks like anymore. She walked upstairs. Richard remained alone in the kitchen. For several minutes, he didn't move. He listened to rain against the darkened study windows. He went to the study. He locked the door behind him, opened a desk drawer, and removed a thin medical envelope. Inside was a document bearing Eleanor's name. He unfolded it carefully. The report was dated weeks before Eleanor had learned she was pregnant. Richard had known. His eyes moved across the page, stopping at the section describing a condition that could make pregnancy extremely dangerous. He folded the document again. Outside the study, Eleanor called his name. Richard slipped the report back into the drawer. By the time he opened the door, his face was calm. But Eleanor had already begun to suspect that her husband knew something about her pregnancy that he had never told her. And whatever that secret was, it had been waiting for her long before the pregnancy began. The question Richard had left hanging over Eleanor followed her into the next morning. She woke before sunrise, unable to forget the medical document she had glimpsed in his study. She did not know what it contained, but she knew one thing. Richard had hidden something from her. At Dr. Carter's office, that suspicion became more frightening. Amelia reviewed Eleanor's records twice before looking up. There is a warning here that should have been discussed with you. Eleanor frowned. What warning? Amelia turned the screen toward her. A previous consultation contained information suggesting Eleanor had a condition that could make the pregnancy considerably more dangerous. Yet the warning had not been highlighted in the notes used during her earlier appointments. I was never told this, Eleanor said. Amelia's expression tightened. That's what concerns me. She checked the records again. Several pieces of information appeared incomplete, including documentation surrounding an earlier consultation. Someone accessed your patient portal, Amelia said. When? Several weeks ago. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Can you see who? Amelia nodded slowly. The access was connected to an authorized device. Eleanor already knew what that meant. Richard. She drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel. When she confronted him, Richard did not deny accessing the account. I was helping you. You read my medical records. I was trying to understand what was happening. You never told me. You were overwhelmed. Eleanor stared at him. You decided what I needed to know. Richard's face hardened. I was scared. No. You were controlling. The word hung between them. For years, Eleanor had trusted Richard to make practical decisions when she felt uncertain. Now she wondered whether that trust had slowly become permission. Had he chosen doctors for her? Had he hidden information? Had he tried to influence decisions she believed were hers? That evening, Eleanor received another call. Samuel. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe across town. When Samuel entered, Eleanor barely recognized the man from her memories. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent years wondering about a life that never happened. I contacted you because I received a message, he said. From whom? I don't know. What did it say? That someone knew the truth about your pregnancy. Eleanor felt cold. What truth? Samuel shook his head. I don't know. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was trying to find out who said it. She watched him carefully. Was it Richard? Samuel hesitated. I can't say. Eleanor felt anger rising. You brought me here and still won't tell me? Samuel leaned closer. Because whoever sent that message wanted you frightened. Why? I don't know. He stood. Before leaving, Samuel looked directly into her eyes. You need to ask yourself who benefits if you don't make it through this pregnancy. Eleanor said nothing. She drove home beneath a darkening sky. The question followed her through every traffic light, every turn, every breath. Who benefits? When she reached the house, Richard was waiting. He smiled. Eleanor looked at him differently. For the first time, she wondered whether the greatest danger surrounding her pregnancy was not outside her marriage. It might already be inside it. She said nothing about Samuel. Instead, she watched Richard prepare dinner as though nothing. He asked about her appointment, and Eleanor gave him an answer. What did the doctor say? Nothing important. Richard smiled. Good. That word unsettled her more than an argument would have. Later, upstairs, Eleanor opened her journal and wrote words beneath the day's date. Someone knows too, again. The words Eleanor had written in her journal stayed with her long after she closed it. Someone knows too. She tried to sleep, but uneasiness kept her awake. Around 2 in the morning, she woke with a crushing pressure in her chest and a sharp wave of dizziness. When she tried to stand, the bedroom tilted violently. Richard! Her voice barely carried. She reached for the nightstand and missed it. A glass shattered against the floor. Richard woke immediately. Eleanor? She was sitting on the carpet, one hand pressed against her chest. I can't breathe. Richard's face changed. He grabbed his phone and called emergency services. Within minutes, the quiet house filled with flashing lights and hurried voices. Paramedics placed Eleanor on a stretcher while Richard followed behind them, asking questions nobody could answer. At the hospital, Dr. Amelia Carter met them in the emergency department. Eleanor was pale and frightened, but conscious. Amelia ordered tests immediately. Hours passed. The results were worse than expected. Eleanor's blood pressure remained dangerously unstable, and the condition Amelia had warned about was progressing faster than anyone had anticipated. When Eleanor was finally stable enough to speak, Amelia sat beside her bed. I need to be completely honest with you. Eleanor looked at her. Your condition has become significantly more dangerous. What does that mean? It means continuing the pregnancy could put your life in grave danger. Eleanor closed her eyes. Amelia waited. There are options, she continued carefully. Eleanor knew what she meant. No. Eleanor, no. This isn't about judging your decision. I need you to understand the medical reality. I understand. You could die. A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek. I know. Then why? Eleanor placed one trembling hand over her stomach. Because I believe there has to be another way. Amelia looked at her for a long moment. This isn't a simple choice. I know. I will support you medically, but I need you to understand that your decision carries serious consequences. Eleanor nodded. I've already lived through losing a child once. Amelia's expression softened. I won't lose this one without fighting. Across the hospital corridor, Richard appeared devastated. He sat beside Eleanor's bed, held her hand, and repeatedly told her how frightened he had been. But after Eleanor fell asleep, Richard quietly left the room. A security camera captured him walking through an empty corridor and stopping near a stairwell. He took out his phone. It's getting worse, he said. There was a pause. I know what the doctor said. Another pause. Then Richard lowered his voice. We may not have much time. The following morning, Eleanor woke feeling strangely calm. Then a nurse entered carrying paperwork. There seems to be an issue with your medical directives. Eleanor frowned. What kind of issue? Someone attempted to modify them overnight. Her heart began pounding. What did they change? The record indicated that certain interventions could be refused under circumstances where you became unable to make decisions. Eleanor stared at the nurse. I never authorized that. The nurse left to contact the appropriate department. Eleanor immediately asked for Amelia. When Amelia arrived, Eleanor's composure finally broke. Someone is trying to make decisions for me. Amelia sat beside her. Do you know who? Eleanor thought of Richard. I think someone is trying to force me into a decision. Amelia took her hand. Then we need to make your wishes unmistakably clear. They reviewed Eleanor's medical directives together. She read every sentence carefully. Then she signed. The document stated that Eleanor wanted her pregnancy continued for as long as medically possible, provided appropriate medical care could be given. Her signature was steady. Amelia witnessed it. Eleanor placed the pen down. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, she felt that something belonged entirely to her. She did not know that the document would eventually become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation into her death. And somewhere outside that hospital room, someone already knew Eleanor had made her choice impossible to erase. But Richard would soon discover that a signed document was more dangerous to his plans than Eleanor herself had ever realized. He could not let it. The signed document gave Eleanor something she had not felt in weeks: control. For several days, her condition stabilized. Amelia remained cautious, but Eleanor was finally allowed to return home with strict instructions, medications, and a schedule of appointments that seemed to fill every corner of the calendar. Richard drove her home. He was polite. Almost too polite. Eleanor noticed, but she said nothing. Her 64th birthday arrived quietly. There were no extravagant decorations or crowded rooms. Instead, a few people Eleanor trusted gathered around the dining table. Amelia stopped by briefly. Samuel set flowers without a card, knowing Eleanor would understand. Eleanor smiled more that afternoon than she had in months. On the table sat a small ultrasound photograph. The baby had become more than an idea. There was a tiny shape on the screen, a heartbeat that Amelia had allowed Eleanor to hear during the previous appointment. Eleanor kept touching the photograph. I think I know the name, she said. Richard looked up. What name? Eleanor smiled. Clara. Richard said nothing. Eleanor returned her attention to the photograph. That evening, after everyone had gone, she opened a small box containing the first thing she had bought for the baby, a white blanket, two tiny pairs of socks, and a yellow knitted cap. She held the cap against her chest and laughed softly. Then she noticed the camera on her desk. An idea came to her. She pressed record. For several seconds, Eleanor simply looked into the lens. "My name is Eleanor Hayes," she began. "I'm 64 years old, and I'm making this because there are things I want my child to know." Her voice trembled. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. People told me how dangerous it could be. Some told me I was being selfish. Some thought I was too old." She paused and wiped away a tear. "But I need you to understand something. I didn't continue this pregnancy because I didn't understand the danger. I continued because you were already part of my heart." She looked down at her stomach. "If you're watching this one day, I want you to know that you are wanted. Every single day." Eleanor ended the recording. She never noticed the small indicator on her computer showing that the file had synchronized to another device. Someone had accessed it. Later that night, Eleanor's phone vibrated. One message. Unknown number. "You were warned. Now everyone will know why." Her hands went cold. She stared at the words for several seconds before deleting the message. She did not tell Richard. She did not tell Amelia. Instead, she placed the phone face down and tried to sleep. Across town, Samuel was experiencing his own unease. As he left work the following morning, he noticed the same dark sedan that had appeared near his apartment the previous evening. He walked faster. The sedan moved. Samuel turned into a crowded street and stopped beside a shop window. The car passed slowly. He could not see the driver. Samuel remained outside the shop, pretending to study the display while watching the vehicle disappear. For the first time, he wondered whether the warning had never been meant for Eleanor alone either. He could not see the driver, but he knew someone was watching him. Back at Eleanor's house, morning sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor. She stood beside the window, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. She was thinking about Clara. She was thinking about the future. She was thinking about the life she still believed she could build. Across the street, hidden behind the reflection of the glass, a dark car had been parked for nearly an hour. Eleanor never saw it. She never saw the figure sitting behind the wheel. And she never knew that someone was watching her prepare for a future they had already begun planning to take away. The darkness outside Eleanor's bedroom window had barely lifted when the pain began. It came suddenly, low in her abdomen, followed by a wave of dizziness, so intense that she had to grip the dresser. "Richard!" He rushed upstairs. Within minutes, paramedics were carrying Eleanor from the house again. This time, Amelia was waiting at the hospital. Something was wrong. Eleanor could feel it in Amelia's silence. The doctor checked the monitors twice before asking a nurse to repeat one of the tests. The baby's heartbeat remained present, but Eleanor's condition had become unstable again. "Is my baby alive?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," Amelia said. "But we need answers quickly." Richard stood beside the bed, pale and rigid. He looked frightened, yet there was something beneath the fear that Eleanor could not identify. For years, she had known every expression on his face. Now, she couldn't read him at all. Doctors ordered urgent testing. Blood work, imaging, and fetal monitoring continued for hours, while Eleanor lay beneath harsh white lights, frightened by every change in the monitors. Then Amelia entered with the results. Her expression was different. "Eleanor, we need to talk." Eleanor looked at Richard. "What happened?" Amelia carefully explained that additional testing had raised questions about the baby's biological father. A paternity test was recommended immediately. Richard went completely still. Eleanor looked at him. "Do it!" The results arrived later. Richard was not the father. The word seemed to empty the room. Eleanor looked at the ceiling, remembering the first moment she had heard the heartbeat. She had known then that her life could never return to what it had been. Richard turned toward the window. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, he asked, "Was it Samuel?" Eleanor's silence answered him. Richard closed his eyes. When he opened them, whatever tenderness remained on his face had disappeared. "How long?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "I was going to tell you." "When?" She swallowed. "Eventually." Richard laughed bitterly. "Eventually?" Eleanor finally admitted what she had hidden. Samuel had returned to her life shortly before the pregnancy. Their conversations had become something more. They had been intimate. But Eleanor insisted she had never planned to leave Richard immediately. "I was confused," she whispered. "I needed time." Richard stepped away from the bed. "You lied to me." "Yes. You made me believe this was my child." "I never said that." "You didn't have to." His humiliation quickly became anger. But investigators soon discovered something that changed the meaning of his reaction. Richard had known for weeks that he was probably not the biological father. He had accessed Eleanor's medical records. He had monitored her appointments. He had searched for information about pregnancy complications. More disturbing, messages recovered from his phone suggested he had been trying to pressure Eleanor into ending the pregnancy. The question became unavoidable. If Richard already suspected the truth, why had he remained silent? Why had he waited? And why had his efforts intensified only after Eleanor refused to terminate the pregnancy? Those questions followed Maya through the hospital corridors. "Why?" Detective Maya Bennett interviewed Samuel. Samuel revealed that Richard had confronted him years earlier. "He told me to stay away from Eleanor," Samuel said. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly. But I understood the message." Then Samuel revealed something Eleanor had never told Richard. She planned to leave him. When? After the baby was born. That revelation gave investigators a possible motive. Richard wasn't simply afraid of losing Eleanor. He was afraid of losing control over the life they had built. That evening, detectives searched Richard's computer. The search history was extensive. Pregnancy complications, medical directives, high-risk pregnancy survival rates, pregnancy at 63, and one final search made only days before Eleanor's hospitalization. What happens if a high-risk pregnancy is continued against medical advice? Maya stared at the screen. The question was no longer whether Richard knew Eleanor was in danger. It was whether he had been studying that danger for a reason. And somewhere inside the search history, investigators suspected, was the answer to why Eleanor had become a threat to her husband. The answers were getting closer. But Maya Bennett knew suspicion was not the same as proof. She arrived at the hospital the morning after the paternity results and asked for every record connected to Eleanor's treatment during the previous month. She did not begin with Richard. She began with Eleanor. Maya reconstructed the final weeks piece by piece. Appointments had been changed without Eleanor's knowledge. Medical information had been accessed from devices registered to Richard. Several calls had disappeared from Eleanor's recent history, while others appeared in unusual hours. Then Maya examined the messages. They had frightened Eleanor into believing Samuel was watching her, threatening her, and trying to take the baby. But the messages were wrong in small ways. One supposedly threatening message had been sent while Samuel was documented at work. Another contained wording copied from an old conversation between Eleanor and Richard. Maya stared at the screen. "Someone wanted her afraid," she said. A technician nodded. "Can you identify who?" "Not yet." Security footage provided another piece. A camera outside the medication room showed Richard entering the restricted corridor during one of Eleanor's hospital stays. He remained there only minutes before leaving. When questioned, Richard appeared offended. "I was worried about my wife." You weren't authorized to be in that area, Maya said. I got lost. Maya wrote something in her notebook. Richard watched her. You think I wanted Eleanor hurt? I think you're hiding something. I loved her. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Richard's expression hardened. Yet Maya still lacked the evidence she needed. Every discovery suggested manipulation, but none proved that Richard had deliberately caused Eleanor's medical decline. Then, late that afternoon, an investigator placed a pharmacy record on Maya's desk. The record showed a medication change authorized under Richard's credentials. Maya read the prescription twice. The new medication could interact dangerously with Eleanor's existing condition. She immediately requested the prescribing history. The timing was disturbing. The change had occurred shortly before Eleanor's symptoms became significantly worse. Maya confronted Richard that evening. Why did you authorize this medication? Richard stared at the record. I didn't realize it could cause a problem. You had access to her medical records. I was trying to help. You knew her condition. I knew she was sick. I wasn't trying to hurt her. Maya leaned forward. Then why change the medication without telling her? Richard hesitated. I thought the doctor had approved it. Which doctor? He couldn't answer. Maya watched the silence grow between them. Finally, Richard said, It was an accident. Maya closed the folder. Maybe. She stood and walked toward the door. But accidents usually don't require this many explanations. Outside, she stopped beside the hospital window and looked toward Eleanor's room. Eleanor was asleep, unaware of the investigation gathering around her. Maya knew the evidence was still circumstantial, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone had frightened Eleanor. Someone had isolated her. Someone had interfered with her medical decisions. And now someone had authorized a medication that could have placed her already fragile life in even greater danger. Maya returned to her office and opened the pharmacy record again. This time, she noticed the authorization timestamp. It had been entered from a device connected to Richard's account. And the time matched a moment when Richard had insisted he was nowhere near the hospital. Maya felt the pieces shift into place. She called the technician back. Pull every access log from that day. Minutes later, another detail appeared. Richard's account had been accessed twice. The first entry matched the medication authorization. The second occurred 11 minutes later, when someone opened Eleanor's medical directive. Maya stared at the timestamps. He had not merely changed medication. Someone had also checked what Eleanor had ordered doctors to do if she became unable to speak for herself. That distinction mattered. Maya printed both records and placed them beside the photographs of the fabricated messages. The psychological trap was beginning to look deliberate. Richard had created fear, then used that fear to control Eleanor's choices. He had information about her health that she did not have. He knew which medications she received. He knew what she had written in her directives. And Maya knew the next step would have to be more than another conversation. It would have to expose the truth Richard had spent weeks hiding. The evidence had finally begun to form a pattern, but inside Eleanor's hospital room, the investigation felt far away. Her condition deteriorated with each passing day. Her blood pressure became increasingly unstable, and the doctors monitored her constantly. Amelia rarely left the floor for long. One evening, Eleanor woke to find Amelia sitting beside her. You're not sleeping, Eleanor whispered. Neither are you. Eleanor smiled faintly. I know what you're going to say. Amelia looked down. Then you know I need you to keep fighting. Eleanor touched her stomach. I am fighting. I know. I also know I might not survive this. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Don't say that. We have to be honest. Amelia took Eleanor's hand. I will do everything medically possible for you and your baby. Everything. Eleanor squeezed her fingers. Then that's enough. Across the hospital, Maya Bennett sat across from Richard with the evidence spread between them. The pharmacy record, the access logs, the fabricated messages, the security footage. Maya placed the documents in front of him one at a time. You accessed Eleanor's medical records. I was helping her. You changed her medication. I followed instructions. You sent messages designed to make her fear Samuel. Richard's expression changed. I never threatened her. You didn't need to. You created the fear. He looked away. I was protecting my wife. Maya watched him carefully. From what? From herself. The answer came quickly. She was making dangerous decisions. You mean refusing the abortion? Richard said nothing. Maya leaned forward. You wanted the pregnancy terminated. I wanted Eleanor alive. Those aren't the same thing. Richard's voice broke. I never intended to kill her. Maya remained silent. Richard continued. I was desperate. She wouldn't listen. She wouldn't understand that the pregnancy could kill her. So you manipulated her. I was trying to save her. You interfered with her treatment. No. You accessed her directives. I was afraid. You frightened her with fabricated messages. Richard looked down. For the first time, his story began collapsing under its own weight. Investigators returned to Eleanor's house and found the journal hidden beneath folded clothing. They also recovered the private video recording she had made for her unborn child. The journal revealed months of emotional pressure. Eleanor described arguments, secret medical access, questions about Samuel, and Richard's repeated attempts to make her feel guilty for continuing the pregnancy. Then investigators found something even more important. A later recording. Eleanor sat alone in her bedroom, visibly exhausted. She spoke directly into the camera. Richard changed something in my medication. She paused. I don't know why he did it, but I know he accessed my medical information. I think he's interfering with my treatment. The recording continued. If something happens to me, please don't assume it was simply because of my age. Maya watched the footage twice. It was not a courtroom confession. It was Eleanor trying to protect herself. But she would never get the opportunity to repeat those words under oath. That night, Eleanor's condition collapsed. Alarms erupted around her bed. Amelia rushed into the room as nurses and doctors surrounded Eleanor. Stay with me. Eleanor's eyes opened briefly. My baby? We're here. Please. We'll protect the baby. The room became a blur of movement. Outside, Maya heard the alarms and stopped walking. Minutes later, Amelia emerged. Her face told Maya everything. Eleanor was gone. Despite every attempt to save her, the pregnancy had ended in the loss of the mother. But the baby survived. A nurse emerged carrying the newborn, wrapped tightly in a white blanket. Maya stood alone in the corridor as the nurse walked past. She watched the tiny face disappear around the corner. Behind her, Eleanor's room was silent. Ahead of her was a child who would grow up knowing almost nothing about the woman who had fought so desperately to bring her into the world. Maya looked down at the evidence folder in her hands. Eleanor had died. But she had left behind a voice, a journal, a signed directive, and enough unanswered questions to ensure the story was not ending in that hospital. For Richard, the investigation was only beginning. Maya intended to find every answer. The corridor, outside Eleanor's hospital room, became the beginning of the case. Richard was arrested after her death. Prosecutors charged him with murder, arguing that he had knowingly manipulated Eleanor's medical care and exploited her fears during the pregnancy. Richard's attorneys built their defense around one fact. Eleanor had known the pregnancy was extraordinarily dangerous. She had been warned repeatedly. She had understood that continuing could kill her, yet she refused to terminate it. Richard's lawyer told the jury that Eleanor had made her own choice. She accepted the risks, he said. A tragic outcome does not automatically become murder. The prosecution disagreed. They argued that Eleanor had accepted medical risks, not deliberate interference. Maya Bennett testified about Richard's access to Eleanor's medical records, the medication change, the fabricated messages, and the attempts to alter Eleanor's medical directives. Each piece of evidence showed a pattern. Richard had not simply disagreed with Eleanor. He had tried to control her. Then Eleanor's journal was introduced. Page after page revealed the emotional pressure she had endured. She wrote about Richard questioning her appointments, monitoring her communications, and making her feel guilty for wanting the child. One entry described the fear she felt when she realized her husband knew things about her medical condition that she had never been told. Another described the anonymous message that warned her she had been warned. The courtroom grew silent as the journal was read aloud. Then prosecutors played Eleanor's final video. Her face appeared on the courtroom screen. She looked tired, but peaceful. I know people will say I was too old. I know people will say I should have ended the pregnancy. But nobody gets to decide whether my life was worth living except me. Nobody moved. Richard stared at the floor. Eleanor's recorded voice continued. I knew the danger. I wasn't confused about it. I simply believed my child deserved a chance, and I deserved the right to make that choice. For the prosecution, those words were crucial. They showed that Eleanor had understood the risks and had accepted them willingly. What she had never accepted was having someone manipulate those risks against her. The trial lasted several weeks overall. Medical experts debated whether Richard's actions directly caused Eleanor's death. The defense repeatedly returned to her age and medical condition. But prosecutors demonstrated that Richard had interfered with her care, hidden information, manipulated her psychologically, and created circumstances that made an already dangerous pregnancy even more dangerous. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty. Richard showed no reaction. The verdict brought justice, but it did not bring peace. Samuel carried guilt for years. He wondered whether reconnecting with Eleanor had placed her in greater danger. Amelia carried a different burden. She questioned every conversation, every warning, every moment when she might have recognized what was happening sooner. But Eleanor's story continued through the child she had fought to protect. Years passed. The child grew up knowing that her mother had loved her before she ever saw her face. She knew there had been a father who had betrayed that love, a man named Samuel who had once been part of Eleanor's past, and a doctor who had tried to protect them both. But there was one thing she wanted to understand. Who was her mother before the tragedy? One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings in Eleanor's house, she found the recording. She pressed play. Eleanor appeared on the screen. For a moment, the child simply watched. There was her mother's face, younger than the memory she carried, smiling through tears with one hand resting over her pregnant stomach. I don't know what the future holds, Eleanor said. The child covered her mouth. I don't know whether I'll get to meet you. But if you're watching this, then somehow, some part of me made it to you. Eleanor smiled. Whatever happens, remember this, you were loved. The screen went black. For years, people would debate Eleanor's decision. Some would call it courageous. Others would call it reckless. But the tragedy was never simply that Eleanor chose to continue a dangerous pregnancy. Her death came from the collision of medical danger, betrayal, manipulation, emotional control, and a man who believed he had the right to control a choice that belonged to her. Eleanor knew the pregnancy could kill her. She chose anyway. Richard believed that gave him the right to decide for her. It did not. And in the end, Eleanor's final choice survived him.